Hello, everyone. It's December, so it's time to give some stuff away. Throughout the year, I've had publishers and authors sending me some of their books and saying, hey, would you mind giving this away to your listeners? And of course, I said yes, because they're great books that would be of huge interest to you. They include A Voice for Animals, Segregated Species, World War Zoos, The Creative Lives of Animals, Creatures' Needs, and The Omnivore's Deception. If you're interested in being entered into a draw to get your hands on one of these books, all you have to do is share your favorite episode of The Animal Tone via social media. Make sure that you tag us so that I am aware of it and you get entered into the draw. And Bob's your uncle. Next year, I will announce who the winners are.
This is another iRaw podcast.
And that is something I have been interested in, if this makes sense, that there is definitely a different arc when you look at Hindi cinema and how animals have been represented. But if post-90s you see, that is my concern too, that it sometimes you will see in films, either they're at, very much linked to the human and very much, so whatever the human wants to do and think, the animals are kind of speaking for them, but there have been anti-colonial resistance through animals. So I see this very complex kind of depiction of the animal reality in the Indian cinema.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to The Animal Turn. This is Season 8, where we're focused on animals and media. And in today's episode, we're going to be speaking about a medium that's come up throughout the season, and that is film and television. It's been interesting going from the kind of theoretical concepts that we started the season with to now focusing on specific mediums and some of the pressures and challenges that they raise. And of course, things like representation have come up throughout, whether we're talking about film or games. Representation is kind of always there, or social media. But we've also been speaking, I think, a little bit about the material impacts that these different mediums have for animals. And today's episode is no different. Two guests join me who have expertise in thinking about different films. Ankita Rathour is a Marion Britton postdoctoral fellow in the School of Literature, Media and Communication at Georgia Tech University. She received her PhD in English from Louisiana State University in 2023. As a scholar, she is deeply invested in exploring Hindi cinema, primarily Bollywood, and the violence in post-colonial spaces. She was a Fulbright foreign language teaching assistant at the University of Hawaii in Manoa, and her academic and popular articles have been published in Media Watch, eSign India, Journal of Applied Learning and Teaching, as well as Feminism in India. And if you are interested in Hindi film and Bollywood, she also has a podcast called the Desi Gaze Podcast. As you'll see from this episode, her knowledge is absolutely extensive. I think we have a tendency of focusing primarily on Western media when we have these conversations, and it's easy to forget that there are massive industries outside of Hollywood, right? Huge, massive industries that have impacts on the ways in which people see and understand and comprehend human-animal relations. And Ankita gives us some really interesting insights both into the industry of Bollywood as well as into some of the representations and material impacts for animals that are involved in it. Then Lynda Korimboccus also joins us today. She's a passionate advocate for equity and justice, as well as a lecturer in sociology and a program tutor for the Scottish Wider Access Program in social sciences at the West Lothian College, where she's worked for 15 years. She's an associate fellow of Higher Education Academy, as well as an independent scholar in the field of critical animal studies. She's currently a PhD sociology candidate who is researching the experiences of vegan children in the education system with a view of making recommendations to expand its inclusivity. Lynda also writes for Faunalytics and is an editor-in-chief of the Student Journal for Vegan Sociology. Now, the reason that Lynda primarily joins us today is she's written about media directed at children. And this is something that's also come up, I think, a bit in the season. Is it's not only a matter of thinking about the medium that is produced, what the output is, but who is consuming the media, who is it being directed at, who's consuming it, and what messages do they take from that. And you might have heard of the Peppa Pig paradox before. Well, that's Lynda's very catchy phrase. And we get a bit into what that means in today's episode, the ways in which, children's, I suppose, behaviors align or misalign with the types of content that they're viewing. It's a really interesting conversation. So we go from everything from children's media to Bollywood to thinking generally about the impacts of film and TV on animals. It's wide-ranging, but super interesting, and I hope you enjoy. As always, I want to say thank you to Animals in Philosophy, Politics, Law and Ethics, Apple, for sponsoring this podcast. Thank you also to Natalie, Tobias and Ellen for their project that's focused on animals and media and for sponsoring this season through funding that they got from the Pollination Project, as well as a variety of different departments at Georgia Tech University. Just a reminder to please leave a review wherever you listen. This is super, super helpful. And if you're looking for another way to support us, you can also check out our merch store where we've got beautiful designs by Rebecca. We've also got some stuff with just the straight up logo as well as a bat hanging upside down. There are t-shirts. My favorite sweater ever. It's like this oversized sweater with just the big logo of the animal turn on the back, and I wear it everywhere. Okay, enough of the rambling. Here we go. Let's learn about TV, film, and animals. Thank you both of you for joining me on the show today. As you know, we're doing a season looking at animals and media. And without fail, all of the guests I've spoken to have at some point made reference to films and TV because I think it's so prevalent in our lives. So I think focusing on that for today's episode with the two of you is going to be wonderful. But let's start with learning a little bit about both of you. So, Lynda, let's start with you. Could you tell me a little bit about yourself and how you came to be interested in doing research on animals and media?
Sure, yeah. I have been studying social science generally since I turned 25-ish, from becoming vegan literally overnight and wanting to know why it was that when I gave everybody the information that I suddenly had become privy to, they did not go vegan. So I thought, well, they just thought it was a bit wacky, you know. I think they thought that anyway, but still that didn't help. So then I set out on a journey of psychology, first of all, didn't answer the questions, social psychology, into sociology, which I've come back to now, through politics, a bit of economics, some philosophy. And now I'm doing my PhD in sociology, investigating the lived experiences of young vegan children in Scotland, what that's like for them, which includes a lot of the kind of media that they're presented with in school, just regular television in any case. And since all this study, I've also had a daughter who's now 11, and she's been, I think, the main prompt for me studying this in particular from some experiences that we had in a kind of mum and daughter going to the theatre kind of a situation. So I can tell you more about that just now if you like, or after. It's up to you. But
well, I think you wrote a little bit about this going to the theatre with your daughter, right? It was a Peppa Pig experience of sorts.
I did. Yeah, I was doing my master's in anthrozoology at that point, and we were talking about how animals are represented. Brilliant course. And we were at a theatre show. We'd gone for a bite to eat first, and there was this little girl sitting, I'll never forget her, and she had all her stuff on, Peppa Pig clips and a little bag and t-shirt and everything, and she was eating a ham sandwich. And I remember thinking, I mean, that's really obviously wrong to me in terms of the cognitive dissonance of it. It's not quite right. But I'd never seen it laid out quite as obviously as that right in front of me going to a Peppa Pig thing. When we got into the theatre, you could order a little lunchbox for the kids. One had a cheese sandwich in it and the other had a ham sandwich in it. That was your choice. So first of all, there was nothing vegan, which is not unusual. But second of all, it was actually ham. And I thought, people aren't making this connection, which I knew about all animals really, but specifically for that species, I thought that's very interesting. All these kids who love Peppa, actually wouldn't miss an episode, and yet might even be sitting watching an episode, having a bacon sandwich or something. So that prompted that. I mean, I don't know how much. I don't think I came up with anything new, but it's certainly the first time that I had thought about a species-specific thing.
I think what's interesting about your story is that a lot of guests on the show have, mentioned how the pets and the animals in their lives have prompted them to think about animals and animal studies in deeper ways, right? Like, so Linus is my dog, and there's a lot about having him in my life that's made me think about the power dynamics involved in pet keeping, for example, that's made me ask questions about, I think, structures I might have taken for granted previously or thought of as being somewhat benign but what's interesting about your story is that it's the presence of children that have also raised some of these questions and the contradictions. And I've worked with kids as well in a kindergarten and in an English school in South Korea. And I mean, animals are just omnipresent in children's education, right? Even when it comes to teaching them about specific days, you could think about Thanksgiving in the US, just the prevalence of animals in communication to animals is just abundant in their learning, in their teaching, in their consumption. So I think this is really important. And we're going to come back to Peppa Pig because there really is a phenomenon with Peppa Pig. But before I get too carried away, Ankita, tell us a little bit about yourself and your interests in animals and film.
So currently, I'm a postdoc fellow at Georgia Tech, Georgia Institute of Technology in Atlanta, and where I teach a lot of themed English courses, but I generally like to theme it around colonialism and post-colonialism. So when it comes to animals, let me start with a story. So I grew up with animals, so I grew up in the eastern region of India, Bihar, one of the richest regions pre-colonially, post-colonially, not so. So I had lots of pets around me, but I also remember I was very afraid of dogs. And that has something which has stayed with me. And then when I started my education, when I started learning more about colonialism, I realized how dogs were very much a part of British colonial system and very much a part of a tool to, scare the natives. And I remember reading George Orwell a lot. And so my love for animals or getting intrigued about them began with his short story, Shooting an Elephant, something I teach too. And it really struck out to me that how he uses this story where he was forced to kill an elephant to really critique the empire. So then I got very much interested into this connection with animals and empire and colonialism.
And there's no material there, right? You were like, animals, colonial empire, no connections.
What is happening around me? Exactly. Like, and I really got very intrigued. I was like, what is happening? And, it takes a simple search to tell you that how the dehumanization by any empire is very much rooted in animality and in like the animalistic terms, right? Like Indians and dogs not allowed. Okay. And right now the far-right Indian government is kind of rehashing it by saying Muslims and dogs not allowed. So I have always been intrigued by the political implications and the capitalist implications on what happens to animals within this, not only a post-colonial setting, but also complicating that post-colonial setting. I come from a country where cows are sacred, right? But you will find beef, right, in northeast regions or southern regions. And then that image of cow has been really used to really punch down on minorities. So I've been very interested by all of these factors. But when it comes to my work, Claudia, this is a funny story. I remember when I came to US, I will always have these images of a film that I watched while growing up. I forgot the name. All I remember that there was this group of rich people who had hunted a pig to roast. But because they're drinking and they're living on an indigenous land, they accidentally cook an indigenous man himself. And that was about this whole link of cannibalism, but also like, being on the indigenous land has kind of haunted me, to be very honest. But I forgot the name of the movie. I would remember bits and pieces. And I was like, okay, this is haunting me. I really need to go back to that. Well, lo and behold, I recently remembered the name of the film, and I run a Bollywood or a film podcast, which is called The Desi Gaze, and I talk about that film in my very recent episode. So I would say my work with animals is quite recent. This is something I have done this year. And then I wrote about a Bollywood Hindi film of 2011 called Tigress, Sherni, which kind of explores this triad of femininity, nature, and animal population in an indigenous land. And since then, I have been very interested in figuring out what is happening with the representation of animal in Hindi cinema and how it is shifting, if it is shifting, but what kind of consumption issues are emerging from those films when you look at that 1994 film about critiquing, elites and critiquing the native elite, for example, and how they consumed the indigenous land and how they consumed the animals without much thinking. So I think I will stop here because I can keep talking about that, but that has been my interest lately.
No, I mean, it's great to have you both on the show because I think we're so used to thinking about, US media. And I think that's with good reason. US media does permeate. I mean, I'm from Johannesburg, South Africa, and I could tell you more about US films and media than I can South African film and media, even though it's a burgeoning and growing industry. But Bollywood is its own massive enterprise, right? Like Bollywood is I think Asian production in general has exploded in recent times. There's a lot of conversation about what's happening with South Korea, K-pop, of course, in terms of music, but also in terms of soap opera and daytime TV. And maybe we can kind of start getting a little bit into thinking now about film and TV in general and why it's important when we think about animals. But while we're sitting here talking about Bollywood, why do you think it's important for people to just be aware of, I guess, the differences between Bollywood and Hollywood? Like, why is this something? I think it's significant because it's a massive industry and loads of people consume it. But what are some of the core differences or hallmarks that makes Bollywood Bollywood?
That's a great question, and I'm so glad you asked. So first of all, Bollywood is one of the many film industries in India. Core difference: it's a Hindi language film industry, and it's situated in the western state of Maharashtra. We have other film industries. So one of the things people should know that when we talk about really popular Bollywood film, we are talking about a very particular language hegemony, right? It's in Hindi. There are other regional films who have been actually equally or far more better than Bollywood, but Bollywood has such an impact or such a control, not only on cultural consciousness or culture making, but literally on what kind of films get produced and how. So that is one difference. That is not to say that Bollywood or Hindi film is to be criticized, because it is one of the only film industries which was imagined and flourished during active colonialism. And just for that fact, I have been obsessed with studying this film industry. What are you telling me? Because Britishers would, colonizers would always control what kind of films you can make and what kind of topics you can talk about. Hence, there are many mythological films that began, right? You cannot criticize the empire. But then it has something which has survived that onslaught. And one of the key differences is just in aesthetics, right? So whenever I mention Bollywood, to, let's say, my American students, right? And they're like, oh, it's all about dancing. And I'm like, not really. There are big budget movies which do a lot of dancing, and dancing is different. You will also have Bollywood films where just community comes together and dances. They're not big budget, but they show the celebration of the working class, the masses coming together. And then it's a lot of colors. I was like, well, I can think of a lot of colorless Bollywood movies, which is literally just black and white. So one of the key differences is aesthetic. And what does that mean? That Hindi film industry is very much rooted in its theater form. That means Parsi theater, Marathi theater. So what does that mean? That we are something very much centered on affective realism than cognitive realism. So, for example, in Hollywood, as a viewer, you are the meaning maker. But you can also understand when colonialism ended, it was also, films began a tool of nation shaping. Like, wow, we are independent now, and let's make movies which really show our struggles. So the 50s and 60s, and they were very important decades for Hindi cinema, and hence Hindi cinema has been very popular in Soviet Union, for example, during that time. There was a direct correlation of socialist cinemas. But lo and behold, in 1991, one of the differences is to understand this model of industry. Soviet Union collapses, India is looking for newer markets, and who enters? Drum rolls, United States. We start getting and receiving all of this American culture. So, Claudia, I really felt what you said, that sometimes I would know so much more about Hollywood cinema than my own Bollywood cinema. And it is very interesting because when it came, it was also when I was growing up, it was like, okay, this is very exotic. US films were very exotic for me. So I was like, wow, this is interesting. But it also kind of really changed our own perception. And that is the post-colonial theory of like how you can internalize this imperialistic views about yourself. So we were not very consciously consuming this cinema, and it changed the industry after that. So I think those are the major differences. That is to say, for example, when it comes to animals in Bollywood, that has been always been there. Right? Always been there. Like animals were such an important part of just nation making, because what we also wanted to show that nature and animals and humans are interlinked. We are not separate, right? And you will see this still happening, being rehashed in what they call pan-Indian movies like RRR. There is a scene where all the tigers and all the animals are coming out with the central character to attack on the the officers of the British Empire. So that is something I would like to point out, that we have, when you talk about Hindi cinema, we have really been interconnected with this nature animal thing. So when people say, oh, I see a lot of films now talking about animals, I'm like, really? I'm like, there are many films before that. There have been dogs, there have been snakes, there have been everything, and that is why also I got interested in this topic, because what is more lovely than going back to your cultural products like Hindi cinema and looking into them?
What I think is interesting here, though, is even if I think, let's say, of British or US film industries, or even I almost think you could think of any film industry, the connectivity between nationhood and film is high, and also the connections between animals and nationhood are high, regardless of, I think, many cultures and many nations have used animals in a variety of ways to kind of show themselves off. And of course, this is very pronounced in India, as you mentioned now, with regards to cows and questions with regards to the Hindu state and the politics with regards to that. Okay, really fascinating and interesting. So, but I hear you, and it is important to keep in mind that there are these different regional differences. And I think when we think about this, it's important to hold that. But then you've got other shows like Peppa Pig, which, Lynda, when I read your paper and it said that it had been translated into I don't know how many languages and is shown in 180 countries in the world, which is, it's a sensation. Like, I got to say, I really don't like Peppa Pig. Like the level of language alone, I'm like, come on, just use full sentences. I'm not a mom. But I'm like, oh. But
you don't have to be. It's still irritating.
Yeah. Oh my God, that's really want to scratch my eyeballs out a little. But clearly the kids are seeing something. Clearly the kids are, this is doing something, not just for the parents, but for the kids. And this is a global phenomenon that seems to be speaking across cultures, across geographies. So, what is this Peppa Pig phenomenon? And then, let's go from there.
Just briefly talking about film culture there. I'm in Scotland, and Scotland has a quite a unique place within the United Kingdom of being culturally incredibly specific. Our national animal is a unicorn.
I love that so much. I love that. Like, what's the history of that? How did Scotland decide to have its national?
I really need to know that more than I actually do. So that's my job when I got off the call today. I think it's wonderful. It says a lot about us, I think. Peppa Pig is a phenomenon. I think there's another show that's kind of creeping up into popularity called Bluey, which is, I think, New Zealand or Australian. I'm hoping that catches on more because it's a much preferable. It's not even remotely irritating. But it's a family of dogs. So the point, I suppose, that I was trying to make in my paper is still, how can children be so invested in a albeit anthropomorphic creature, yet still not see those connections? We don't have. Certainly British culture, I don't even really know what that means. My dad came from Mauritius, and that was colonised as well, and that's how he ended up here, because there was a big move to bring everybody here to do nursing and whatnot. Complex history. But in Scotland, I think, where was I going to go with that? We don't have our own. We have a couple of different shows, but there's nothing specifically Scottish for kids as such.
Interesting.
So I did another paper about animal representation in the media, looking more widely at, is it just Peppa or are there others? But yeah, Peppa's phenomenal. Kids are obsessed with her, despite the irritation, even the voice. Please, I'm sorry for the lady that does the voice. I'm sure she's very nice, but even the voice is a bit annoying. Her attitude is terrible. She's a terrible big sister to her little brother, all that kind of stuff. But then that's kids, right? So I feel there must be some connection that kids make with this kind of, oh, well, here's the world, and it's all very simplified. It's all very straightforward. I'm not sure why that show in particular, and the pig in particular, when kids would say, if you ask them, they like cats and dogs better, because they recognise those as so-called pets. And yet there's this little pig, and very simply drawn pig at that. It's not even a complex illustration. The animation is really quite, I'm sure it takes lots to do, but it's not, we're not talking Hollywood graphics here. So she's captured the imagination of everyone. But as I was looking through, so between that study and also the other study, I watched 66 and a half hours of children's television, which was an eye-opener, I have to say. And Peppa's there. She's every single morning without fail. And also, I think partly it's because she's available in the free-to-view channels here. You don't have to have Sky TV or Virgin Media or any of these other kind of packages in order to watch her. So there's an element of that, I think, in that she's accessible to everyone.
You made me just think now also about this idea of a shared reality, and something I've been thinking increasingly about with regards to, streaming services, where I think a lot of us are consuming sometimes the same films, but at different times. And this is very different to when I grew up, right? There was the Sunday night movie. Yeah. Everyone would watch the Sunday night movie, and we would connect with it at school on a Monday, or we would all be watching the same.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. We used to have children's hour here. It was like 1 hour of one day of the week. Yeah. And everyone watched it because that was the only time to see stuff like that. And you can stream Peppa. Yeah. You can stream Peppa Pig.
I don't know. In some ways, I feel like kids have more of a shared reality with the stuff they consume than a lot of adults do. Like, a lot of kids are able to talk across one another, and even across, let's say, cultural or language barriers, because they seem to consume the same.
They've got that in common, of course.
Exactly. And whereas, I don't know, I don't think many adults have that same kind of shared reality or time.
I think it gets lost now because as the older you get, and the older kids get as well, by high school, they're all watching various different things. But certainly in primary, there's still that kind of, first of all, they're maybe not able to stream things. They're like 4 or 5 years old, right? So although I don't know, my daughter's thumbs can work miracles on various gadgets. But that's still something that, and by wearing this stuff, there's so much merchandise, whether it's bags or whatever, they already know that the other person is familiar with it. I'm not sure there's any child in, certainly the UK anyway, that would know who Peppa Pig was.
You
So,
mentioned
yeah.
this idea of pig ignorance in that same paper as well. So you speak about, the children are consuming, and arguably the parents are consuming as well, two types of pigs in this story. One, the representation of Peppa the pig, this anthropomorphic pink girly pig that, is difficult. And then you've also got children consuming literal pigs in the form of ham, etc. And you were building on this idea of the meat paradox, but now looking at the Peppa Pig paradox, loving one pig and eating another. But in this kind of conversation, you speak about pig ignorance as one of the key mechanisms that's driving this paradox. Could you explain that a little bit?
Please join me for the Nature Disturbed podcast, a podcast about the good, the offensive, and the confusing parts of the animal kingdom, from the sewers of Florida searching for alligators. Oh no, did I forget to put the bins out? To the surface of Mars, investigating the possibility of life beyond Earth. Sorry, I had some bubbles lodged in my throat. I said, to the bottom of the Mariana Trench, all while interviewing scientists about their research along the way. Do you like comedy, whimsical storytelling, and learning about the natural world? If not, then you'll hate the Nature Disturbed podcast.
I do like a play on words, so I couldn't help myself with that. And the alliteration was just too much. But yeah, I mean, a lot of it is about language, and although she's anthropomorphic, there are elements even in the programme of piggishness. So they do have little curly tails, and they do oink or noises to that effect. So there's enough piggishness in there rather than humanness that still defines her and her family as a pig. All the friends you have none of them are human. They're all different species of animals. So I find it really fascinating. And the idea as well that we can separate, and it is built on the meat paradox, this idea we can separate those animals are for eating, and those are for entertainment, and those ones are for pets, and these ones are for this is for and that, for this and that. But in this particular case, and also with lambs, which I mention a little, we've just had Easter time. There's lambs bouncing about the fields here. It's all very lovely. People stop or they take their kids to go feed the lambs. And then Sunday roast on Easter Sunday is inevitably, in the UK anyway, a roast lamb. That one's, it's not even called something different, at least. And for pig flesh, we have different versions of that, bacon, ham, whatever, but we still call lambs lambs. So there's not even that disconnect that you could argue is a language-based thing. So, but pigs in particular, and I mentioned this, and that's one of the reasons I used pig ignorant, is that pigs are often used from a language perspective as a negative. So people will talk about you being pig ignorant or stop being such a pig if someone's eating a lot or something like that. Those kinds of connotations and associations. So we don't see pigs in our culture as anything other than edible, and yet there's this pig top of the list in most people's favourite cartoon characters when they're little. It's terrifying, fascinating at the same time, but making those connections. There's been a recent paper, I haven't read it in entirety yet, by a psychologist talking about how younger kids, that's the time to kind of try and address cognitive dissonance before it's even really allowed to kind of start, because kids love animals, or they'll say they love animals even if they don't live with any or they don't see them in real life. There's some kind of affinity with the innocence behind animal life or something, where it's very unlike just like I did a short study which I haven't published, looking at the books in a local library as well. I was thousands of kids' books I went through, and I was looking at how many have animals as their main character. Are they anthropomorphized or not? And again, it was the majority of these books have animal characters, and kids find their draw with that. A lot of the stories at school, it's the same. Very seldom are they just in a book as a pet, and I hate that word, but most of the time children's TV is the same. With that other study I did about children's television programs, 51% of the programs had animals as main or lead characters. So it's everywhere around them, and it's not. And often these key species are non-domesticated species too. So Alvin and the Chipmunks is big in the States. Also here, who has a chipmunk? Most people don't. But there's some kind of connection there, though, nonetheless, because of the way that they're represented. So I do find it fascinating that those connections aren't made. But then I kind of conclude that it comes down to willful ignorance, ultimately. This idea that in order to address that, you would then be required, possibly or likely, to have to make changes as a parent to your life because your child suddenly makes the connection.
Yeah, I think you mentioned this idea of strategic ignorance, which I thought was
Yes.
quite helpful. You pointed to another paper where they spoke about it's not a matter of people being unaware of these paradoxes, but more a matter of people oftentimes choosing to ignore, which is quite that's a little bit of a different sentiment, because I think often when we talk about animals in media, especially when it comes to things like thinking about animal rights, etc., a lot of people would say, well, it's just a matter of education. We just need to educate. But clearly, when you look here, you're seeing a difference. It's interesting that it's not just a matter of telling people that this paradox exists. There's something else going on here. And it's interesting what you said about getting to children before these ideas have cemented. But it seems that they're cemented very young with kids. I mean, you talk to kids who are 4 years old already, and things are already pretty locked in place.
They are. I mean, it's difficult because at the point where you would maybe need to capture the ideas and mold them a little more to make them more realistic, they're not really in the public domain, the kids at that point. I'm sure there's some ethics involved in this too. But yeah, kids are still... But again, they're coming from their, parents' generations, grandparents. I mentioned in the paper as well, I remember being at my grand's house, and my gran used to like to go up to the butcher's of a morning. That's when everybody shopped every day because people didn't have fridges. And she would have potted meat or tongue. And I remember having a slice of tongue, and she had some salad around it. And I was going, why is it called tongue, Gran? And she says, oh, because it's a tongue hen. She knew what it was. It's not even pretending to be anything else. It even looked like a large piece of a tongue. And I remember thinking, oh. And then...
I did a similar thing with goose down, actually. I remember because,
right.
Everyone speaks about goose down in their clothing, and having this realization, oh, wait, that's goose down is actual goose. So somehow we are able to have this kind of separation of ideas. And Ankita, do you see this type of cognitive dissonance happening in the films that you're interested in?
Oh, absolutely. And I was actually will start with saying that there is a complete Hindi translation of Peppa Pig in India, by the way, very famous. But so many things that just came to my mind listening to Lynda, because I immediately went to Animal Farm, again, George Orwell. I'm very sorry in thinking about pigs, but I was very intrigued what Lynda you said about like there are hierarchies within the animal species that we like to talk about, right? And that's why I've been thinking a lot about, like, for example, Peppa Pig is so popular in India, but we will be using pig, which are consumed in Muslim cultures, to kind of encourage Islamophobia. You see what I mean? So these are the contradictions I have been very generally interested in. Actually, when it came to films, maybe I can here read the quote, Claudia, and I will link what I'm trying to say after this quote. And this comes from a paper that I was recently reading, From Symbolic to Agential, The Evolution of Natural Representation in Indian Eco-Sensitive Films. So majorly it talks about nature, animal, and women. But the The quote says that as it has been copiously argued, the very existence of Indian cinema is intricately related to its national political backdrop, which became even more apparent in the general filmic sentiment of the early 90s, which saw the emergence of the feel-good, all happy in the end, tender love stories with lots of songs and dances, family values, and their palpable, if not entirely self-evident, investment in our culture. The 1990s is the defining moment in the history of Indian cinema that emerged in collusion to the neoliberal bent of the Indian economy, transcending its state-controlled socialistic space and embracing market-oriented capitalist norms that, apart from generating deeper social layers and economic deprivation, cast a deep effect on national forestry and ecology. The natural resources of India around this time started to be valued for a range of services they can provide, to the hydrological cycle, to soil systems, biological diversity, and so on. And it was very interesting when I read this quote, and I was immediately reminded of the shift in animal representation we have seen all across, let's say, Hindi cinema. So earlier movies, there is a movie called Hathi Mere Sathi, which loosely translated will be Elephant My Friend, or Teri Meherbaniya, which is about this relationship between a dog and a guy. But what I noticed that here, both the animals, elephant and a dog, are very much in service of the human, right? Like you are somebody who is representing our anthropic features to the audience. And then you see, so I've been very interested in just the question of subalternity if I talk post-colonially. Is like, who speaks for these animals? And what does it even mean to represent animal agency, right? And then that's why the paper I wrote on Tigress 2011, I actually argue that the subaltern cannot speak, thank you Gayatri Spivak, but the subaltern can gaze. Because when you watch that movie, Tigress, you see this agency which is beyond the purview of speech, because the story is about this female forest officer who goes to this land and she sees a lot of coal mining happening in the area, right? That means a lot of forests are being erased. And there is this interesting kind of rumor that is going around that, hey, the tiger population in that forest is actually man-eating tigers. You know, there are man-eating tigresses, which is the rumor started by the government, started by the forestry agency, and she's trying to solve them. And in the movie, we see the kind of shared reality, as we are talking about, a shared suffering between, a female forest officer in a very male-oriented job, the local tiger population, and the indigenous people whose livelihoods are being erased through the forests. And that is something, that is an arc that I have noticed in Indian film. So initially, animals at the service of the human signifier, and then animals who can't speak are very much like the indigenous people who can't speak for themselves. But in the movie, they can gaze. So this close-up shots just staring is something wonderfully done in the film. And now recently, when you look at other Indian cinemas, moving beyond Hindi cinema, like Jallikattu, which is about a lot of animal agency, but it also kind of uses to poke commentary or critique that, there is always an animal within the human. So when we say like how we give hierarchy of animals, we kind of like, okay, like, and that is something I have been interested in, if this makes sense, that there is definitely a different arc when you look at Hindi cinema and how animals have been represented. But if post-90s you see, that is my concern too, that it sometimes you will see in films, either they're at, very much linked to the human, and very much so whatever the human wants to do and think, the animals are kind of speaking for them. But there have been anti-colonial resistance through animals. So I see this very complex kind of depiction of the animal reality in the Indian cinema.
It is complex. It's interesting that you bring in capitalism there ultimately, because I'm a sociologist, can't help it anyway. But the capitalist will, I suppose, is so responsible for a lot of how this stuff is maintained, I think. So it doesn't benefit the capitalist system for us all to go vegan, for example, until the green pound is well established. And for a while there, actually, in the UK, it was doing pretty well, and there was vegan stuff everywhere, and it's kind of waned a little again. And that was following a couple of documentaries where people actually couldn't really avoid it, and many people made a shift. But again, often the mistake is not seeing the connections. I mean, you mentioned about women, and you mention colonialism, any kind of oppression, really. These things are one and the same thing. The system that creates this oppression is the same system. Marjorie Spiegel did some great work years ago, with the dreaded comparison, just saying these are the same. What we see happening around the world to peoples who are already marginalised, it's the same. Women do make up the majority of humans, not human animals in our country, and yet still marginalised, oppressed, exploited, right? So if we can't even stop our own kind from experiencing this, how do we get to a system at a stage where we are even going to consider non-human animals? And then within that, you've got the hierarchy. It's probably not a bad time for my quote, if that's okay, Claudia.
Yeah, go ahead.
So, not as extensive as yours, but the people that really, I guess. So my PhD supervisor, actually, Kate Stewart, and her hubby Matthew Melsa, have done some amazing work, and they've been looking at animal representation for a long time, and they wrote the book that I was hoping to eventually write. But I was like, yay, good. So part of a lot of their they've done a lot of great work about this. So their quote, it's just literally a tiny sentence if I can find it. That all of this stuff is a distraction, characterizing animals in a particular way. So they have a great chart about how speciesism, which is ultimately the difficulty here, how it's represented, where we have some animals are visible, and we see them and we care for them. We have feelings for them and emotions about them, positive ones. Some are invisible, but we would still feel that way. So, for example, when there's the odd story about some random wild animal that's at risk, suddenly everyone gets together and everyone wants to save this great ape or something that's completely out with their circle of reality, right? That we would save that. The cat that gets put in the rubbish bin and ends up all over Facebook because people are horrified by the actions of that owner. Don't like that either. That's another thing we can come back to. But then there are the invisible animals. So there's the ones that we don't see, just big, bugs and stuff. We're not going to see them so much. And then there's the ones that are in the slaughterhouses. The ones that we don't see, that we probably wouldn't want to see, that we don't have regard for because we don't see them as having the same value. But all this other stuff about keeping animals they're in our psyche, but they're in our psyche in a fake way. Really, what we think we know about them isn't what we know about them. Their quote, and I'll link it to the work that I did about how animals are essentially like thingified, if you like. Mostly wild animals, mostly pet animals, companion animals, whatever you want to call it. But it doesn't matter how it's characterized, it's a distraction really from the reality of that. So the quote from their 2018 paper, which is Advertising Oppression, the Reproduction of Anthroparchy in UK Children's and Family Television, part of a larger collection about transspecies social justice, is that children's affective imaginations are directed towards representations and away from the real victims. So that's the quote that I picked because I think that really captures exactly what or why kids don't grow up, despite this love of animals, automatically to be even vegetarian, let alone vegan. So
I think that's really powerful because, I mean, coming back to what you were saying a moment ago about, I guess, the interlinkages of oppression, right? I think the argument you made there is an argument I think a lot of vegans have faced is how can we be concerned with animals when we haven't dealt with the inequalities between humans? But I think a lot of the scholarship coming forward now is saying, well, you can't, it's not a matter of just looking at one kind of oppressive system.
One
But
or
in many
another.
ways, kind of animal rights,
Yeah.
to use Will Kimlicker's phrasing, has been the orphan on the left, where a lot of radical groups do tend to support other radical movements. But when it comes to things
Yeah.
and questions of
Yeah.
the consumption of animals, it is something of an orphan on the left because of this kind of willful resistance.
Willful ignorance, right? Because actually it shouldn't be. When you look at Carol J. Adams' work about, she's an eco-feminist. Loads of vegan feminist stuff is just phenomenal because it's the same. It's the same gaze. Talking about gaze earlier, this male gaze on the female body, whether it's a cow or a pig or a chicken or a lamb, a sheep or a human. It's the same. Seeing female, and this links a lot to I did some study on eco philosophy, green philosophy. It's the same thing about seeing the earth and Mother Nature and all this kind of femininity, and it's all, well, that's just there for our taking. Our being, predominantly a patriarchal capitalist society, right? Yeah. So you put all that together, and it is interlinked. We talk a lot about intersectionality. This is the kind of word of the decade, if you like. But people aren't really seeing just how intertwined these things are.
Yeah.
And if they did, they would maybe be horrified. I don't know how we
I know that there's a common phrase saying, more feminists should be vegan, just because a lot of the questions with regards to the consumption of milk is a question about reproductive rights, about how female bodies are used to reproduce harm. But I think coming back to your quote there, what's also interesting is, and in doing the season, I've noticed it a lot, is we do tend to focus oftentimes in thinking about representation, right? Because media, the theme for this season is on a mediated experience, right? So how do we do, like Ankita, how you were mentioning, how do we do justice to the animals on the screen? Or is it just they're included on screen for our own gratification? And I think oftentimes there are just metaphors on screen for a broader question with regards to, let's say, nationhood or damage done to Earth. And you see this, and this is one of my concerns with an ecocentric frame, is you can have discussions about nature and still somehow not see animals and their individual experiences or take their experiences seriously. So do you see, Ankita, when you look at these kinds of films and these questions about nature, using Lynda's quote as a launch pad, how much are animals' lived experiences really used to inform the representations we see?
That's a great question. Few of the things to add there, what Lynda was previously talking about. When you're talking about thinkification, it immediately reminded me of Aim Sager, who actually talks about the interlinking, the whole connection between how we perceive animals, especially who we see are kind of, discardable. And it's interconnection with the bodies of Black and brown people, right? So this thingification that has worked for the colonized is very much the thingification we link with the animals, right? Because that's how exactly the, capitalism or capitalist imperial colonialism began. The first thing is you have to go after their livestocks, right? And it also reminds me of so much problematic conversation in war-torn areas when they speak of certain humans as human animals, which has always intrigued me. I was like, what do you mean? So that is there. Definitely Orientalism when it comes to representation of animals, but also representation of animals and femininity together, which kind of connects to the question Claudia asked, like the politicization of representation on screen. And that is something I still grapple with. So, for example, if I see an pan-Indian movie like RRR, where animals and humans are coming together in their anti-colonial unity, and I was like, okay, great, but I need more exploration of just animals beyond that human association. And what does that mean? So definitely it has become a vantage point when I see Indian cinema to not only talk about anti-colonialism, but also talk about just capitalist progress and growth, which automatically kind of renders animals to a very limited area. It's like, okay, that is how they're going to benefit us. And in both ways, I think it's kind of problematic for me, because I'm also like that. And maybe this happens with films, or maybe it's the intention of the directors that this is what I want to focus, so they have to make hard choices. I don't know. But in both ways, either you're going very anti-colonial or you're doing a very pro-capitalist representation of animals. I always think about what will be the way to just make this as a better representation. What would be the way where maybe the audiences can maybe sit in discomfort? Sometimes I think about maybe show them a whole 15-minute running of cows running amok in a field. But what does that mean? What does that do to reception? So, and also just to complicate our discussion, because I'm such a fan of complications, I remember when there was a documentary on Netflix. It was shot in India, and it was about this. I'm forgetting its name right now, but I'll Google it. It was about this old couple in southern India and how they rear this baby elephant. They take the baby elephant in their family and, really take care of it, bring it up, and this whole association with the human animal, which was very interesting, because when I read about the documentary, I came to know about the controversy that the film went in, that how these main characters, the couples, were not paid by the filmmakers, and which immediately struck me of, the politics of labor. But what I was also struck by, I was like, what about the labor of the elephant? You know what I mean? The elephant who's being shot in its entirety to make a documentary. What happens to that? Is that something we don't register because it is mute, it hardly talks? And that's why I've been very interested in the kind of humanness generally we provide within the limitation of speech, that somebody speaks, hence they can represent themselves. And I was like, what if somebody represents beyond speech? Yeah.
Speaking for someone else can be problematic too, because actually people who talk about, we need to speak for the animals, they have no voice, but actually,
exactly,
should we though, even? I don't know what it's like to be an elephant.
Yeah. Right.
I can imagine, the only way we can imagine is through the lens of humanity and our own emotions and feelings, because that's the best you can do. And I mean, obviously through empathy, people do that with the best intention. But actually, I mean, we have a cat that lives in this house, and other than frequently displaying his rear end to me, he really just does whatever he wants. He doesn't care enough. I mean, maybe he does care. I don't know. Is caring a thing that cats do? I suppose. But then people try to do that. There's a new short that's going to appear in the UK cinemas in the advertising bit about a pig called Matilda. It's an animated, it's a little animated short that I think it was Surge Activism did, and it's lovely. And what's doing is explaining about this piglet who was born in essentially a factory farm.
Was this done by Ed Winters?
Yes,
it's Ed Winters.
Surge,
okay, yeah.
It's won an award recently as well, just the other week. So
he's done remarkable work.
He's phenomenal. This is going to get everywhere, but people are, and some of it's a bit uncomfortable because it's not always, just one piglet got out, but actually, it's all very, I don't know. It's again, we're going to get back to the fact that folk will go, oh yeah, that's right, that's terrible, and then right back to life and on again. The discomfort isn't enough. Speaking, even when you do it through the lens of a human voice, which is what people, the lens of voice, that doesn't work, but people are trying to humanize the non-humans in order to give humans maybe more empathy towards them. That's not enough either. So
could this not be a time thing? And I hear what you're saying, that it hasn't been enough. To date, it hasn't been enough. But perhaps there is a I mean, and maybe at societal level it hasn't, but maybe it's an accumulative factor.
I have to hope so.
Perhaps.
And I think back to when I first went vegan in 1999 and how basically nobody even knew what that was. And I couldn't buy any ready-made food, and I had to learn how to actually cook at age 25. I should have probably known before that, but
you're
anyway.
You're not alone with that. I think it's and again, I think a lot of this comes to. I mean, what you both have done so well is tying together, I think, the kind of material realities that are tied to the film and TV industry, whether that's the making of the money or the selling of the merchandise or the animals that are actually filmed, like the elephant being filmed, or the gaze of the tiger or the pigs that are being consumed. Like there are real animals' lives implicated when we're talking about film and TV. And so often, to your point, Lynda, that when we talk about film and TV and when we consume film and TV, we're only really concerned with representations. And
Right.
that kind of marrying of material realities and representations. I mean, loads of people have tried, right? And for some people, it has worked. So both of you have mentioned documentaries, and I think maybe I don't know if either of you have done work in documentaries, but when it comes to thinking about film, TV, and animals, like with kids' content, I think animals are pronounced in documentaries. Some documentaries, like Earthlings, I know a lot of people. It wasn't my taste. I still haven't watched the whole movie, but I know for a lot of people that documentary
was a turning point.
It was a turning point. It was a big moment of shock. Now, I tend to believe that psychologically, I don't know if moments of shock change behavior. I think it's more of an accumulative, many cuts break a glass type thing. But
maybe, but I don't know. I think you need to just be in the right place. I certainly know when it happened to me, I had given no thought to animals other than, I mean, cows are my favourite animal. They were always. I had like people would buy me stuff with cows on it, and I'd stop at the side of the road, I'd get off my bike and feed them, and loved them, but I ate them, and at no point did I put two and two together. And then one day I just did, and it was an accumulation of anything. There was a Greenpeace activist in a stall in a local town, and that day in my life, I don't know what else was going on. If I knew the answer, I would be making it happen to everybody else, I guess. And I just happened to sit there. There was a little leaflet. It was a Viva leaflet, I remember. And it had a little calf on the front. And I was like, oh, look. And I lifted it. And by the time I finished reading it, I was vegetarian. The penny just dropped. And I just seemed to be open to... And it's not that I didn't know. I must have known.
But that's what I'm saying. And accumulate, you were ready to have that message heard.
Yeah. So it's that readiness. It's how we get people to the readiness. And I guess maybe these documentaries and films and maybe less so the kind of animated representations, maybe less so. But then that's very powerful, the Matilda short that Ed and Serge have done. So, yeah, it's complex. If I knew the answer, the world would be vegan, wouldn't it?
I mean, I guess the question is what do we expect of film and TV? Like maybe I'm expecting too much. Does everything need to be activist, right? So on the one hand is the changing people's consumptive behavior. The other hand, it's the fair representation. And these are both, I think, questions of welfare, questions of rights, questions of thinking about who belongs.
So the documentary I was mentioning is called The Elephant Whisperers. It's only a 41-minute documentary from 2022. So definitely watch it. That got me thinking a lot about representation and everything. And I know we were talking about what does it even mean to understand what animals are feeling. And I grew up with elephants, actually. I would remember my childhood just going to the nearby pond and just playing with them. And really getting to know, like, what they're feeling, they're smiling, or how they're doing. And I feel that with my dog too, who's the laziest dog right now, you'll see. And so I've been really thinking about, like, what does it mean to even know them? And is it important to know them, to represent them better? And these are the questions I've been thinking. But just to complicate it again, my God, you guys are going to hate me.
No.
To talk about some of the vegetarian politics in India, because it's very important to bring caste here. I absolutely recommend looking in the works of Bhimrao Ambedkar, Suraj Yengre, my very good friend Kamna Singh, who has always talked about caste. But do you know? I'll tell you one thing. So as I told you, I was born and brought up in Bihar, which is the eastern indigenous land in India, right? And I would always notice, like when I moved to the north, to the capital city of India, I'm not kidding, Claudia, I could have easily moved to New York. It was so different for me. But when I moved to Rajasthan, this vegetarian belt, we call it, when you move to Rajasthan or certain Hindu areas where they really boast about their vegetarianism, right? Like, oh, we are vegetarians. People who consume meat technically are either poor or Muslim or Dalit, right? Because food politics has been there. Because what is available to them, that's what they have eaten. Like caste was so bad in India, it's still that the Dalits survived on eating rat meat. And I always think about that when I think about animals. I was like, because it shook me. I was like, wow, this is this whole kind of narcissistic pleasure that a casteist Hindu gets out of his so-called vegetarianism, which is very interesting because this is the also Hindu who will go and hunt. So, you know what I mean? And initially I thought it is just my OCD or ADHD brain, but I was like, why can't I sit with this contradiction well? Like you are really virtue signaling and maintaining a caste order out of it. But then you're also going in the jungles and shooting the black
It's
bucks.
a very different kind of, and I think you point to, we tend to think about vegetarianism and veganism as this kind of static and stable concept, but obviously it's not, and it has different histories. And I mean, I'm sure you know Yamini Narayanan's book, Mother Cow, Mother India.
Yes, absolutely.
He charts the kind of connections between the caste system and the privileging of cows. So the kind of the ways in which, speaking about a representation, the ways in which cows are featured as, the mothers of the nation, and they're also, they're made into gods in effect, but kind of that god status can also lead to a lot of really materially horrible life situations for them, right? And like you say, the mobilization of vegetarianism as a it's not just it's literally built into institutions and into systems that help to keep a certain group of people privileged over another group of people. So the politics of consumption then in Bollywood films is, do you see this being represented a lot in a kind of politics of dairy and meat?
Oh yeah, it's very subtle actually. I would say. I wrote my dissertation included a chapter on this. It's about the film Article 15. I think it came out in 2019. And the movie is doing really kind of a good job in kind of representing caste atrocities. But I was very intrigued by this. Was it a blind spot? I don't know. In that particular scene, the villain, right, the casteist villain is seen eating meat, and the police officer is somebody who only is vegetarian. And I was like, that's interesting, because for me it's also like it underdoes the meaning you're trying to portray, because again you're associating him eating chicken, let's say, with villainy, which kind of undoes the anti-caste rhetoric or like the caste, the critique of casteism that you're trying to portray. And these are some subtle ways. And just to mention it, there are many movies. There is a Satyajit Ray short film, which is called Sadgati, Deliverance. It's a 45-minute short film. I can send you guys the YouTube link. It's all about this Dalit man and how he's treated even worse than an animal. So, he works for this high caste Hindus who so-called respect the cow, but they don't. Material contradiction is everything. And the way he is killed and just left to kind of rot away with the carcasses of other animals. So there are some very important Indian cinema which have really tried to show you that. But again, I'm always very intrigued, Claudia, by what gets distributed and how. So there are Hindi films, right, which have done great job in kind of bringing the anthropic and a good representation when it comes to human-animal coexistence. But I think for me and from my study, what I have seen, it all comes down to distribution. So, for example, I would love to see these movies streaming. They don't. And that's been my biggest challenge, like how to make sure that they, not get lost eventually.
That's really interesting, actually, because my automatic response to that is, who's behind that not getting out then?
And also, just to add, I will ask listeners to look into the labor politics of animals being used in Hindi cinema. It's a whole another rabbit hole which you can go and actually do research.
Early on, you mentioned kind of this changing arc, right, of Hindi cinema, but I think you've seen this changing arc of animals in Western cinema as well. I mean, one of the changes in arcs was, I was reading just before this, the kind of all of a sudden the addition at the end of a film saying no animals were hurt in this film.
Right,
This
right.
was it wasn't something that was always there. So you're starting to get a realization of people asking, and that to me points to the fact that either people in the industry or people consuming those films were starting to ask enough questions that this was warranted.
Yeah.
But then also in terms of the types of stories that were being told, I mean, one can't help but think back to their own childhood, right? Like I grew up with Free Willy and Lassie, and like you said, all of these like the Benji, oh my God, Benji, and All Dogs Go to Heaven, and these movies were all about animals having a lot of agency and like fighting systems, but also with like a human friend often, right? Like a human that saw them for them, and it was a lot of. Again, I don't have like Lynda. Do these types of films? I don't. It seems.
Do you know what? We must be the same age more or less, because that's my childhood as well.
Yeah. But like what is this what kids are consuming? Because I don't get the sense that you've got these kinds of like human animal. Whereas and Ankita, you were also saying these kinds of like animals in service of humans. Sure, like the humans are all going to they're heroing and they're going to save something, and there's the dog who's coming along for the ride. But there was a moment when the main protagonists were actual real animals, real animal actors who were like fighting a system. And the irony of this, and it's perhaps another paradox, is who is Free Willy in real life, right? And the whole, and if I'm not mistaken, I think it did end up leading to protests about the actual whale's life, and he was released, if I'm not mistaken.
I can't remember which orca it was, but then there's still that's the movie, is it Blackfish?
Yeah, Blackfish.
Yeah, it's all about. It's terrifying, but then also I don't know if there's so much stuff like that anymore. Again, possibly linked to that. The lack of common ground in terms of what people watch now, maybe.
Right.
But then also, I'm thinking about Wicked recently.
Everyone's talking to me about Wicked. I need to watch it. Apparently, it did really well.
There's it's really good. I think it's really good.
Okay, perfect.
What makes it good?
Part of it, I'm not entirely sure, because it's not a story that's like new to anyone, right? It's the Wizard of Oz, right? But part of it is about at the university or the Magic University, whatnot. Animals used to be the ones teaching, and now there's only one left, and is he a goat? I don't remember anyway. Part of it, I don't want to put any spoilers in, but clearly the history of this magical place has involved an awful lot of non-humans and the wisdom that they bring with them. I mean, of course, they speak and all that stuff, and they wear clothes and that, and glasses and whatnot. So there's a bit of a kind of lack of reality there. But animals are definitely a theme in there that you can. But then again, the as with many kind of more fantasy films, you've got some of the evildoers being, having little squads of flying monkeys, or it's bats, or it's whatever, so. That's still maintained. You were talking about the man-eating tigers earlier. We should be afraid of what we don't understand, I suppose. But again, all of this comes down to, and ultimately in the Wizard of Oz, generally it's all about power, isn't it? And the power that comes from, or the power that people want to have over others, usually less fortunate, or usually less worldly wise. I think that's a theme that runs through whatever it is that we're talking about, whether it's a documentary, whether it's animation, whatever it happens to be, is this: someone is making a decision, and getting back to this idea about how it's disseminated, who makes the decisions about what's purchased for what channel and whether or not it's streamed and whether it's free to stream or whether it, and there's a lot of stuff on YouTube, thankfully, at least briefly, you can watch something before it's taken down. Other streaming sites are available. But that somebody makes a decision about, do we want lots of people to watch this or not? And I can't help but, again, cynicism is part of the job of sociology, right? I can't help but wonder that when things become controversial and nobody should be watching that, maybe, or it's like behind paywalls or whatever, that it's because maybe it is very powerful. And
could this be a chicken egg situation though? Because I mean, there's the idea that you've got someone who's making a decision on what do we want the consumers to consume, but there is arguably also a responsiveness of the industry to what people are asking for in terms of consumption, where they spend their money, right? People spend money on consuming Peppa Pig, on going to watch X-Men, on going. So if, again, we need to remember that we're expecting them to act as PSAs, right? So there's daytime television. We have different expectations of our government TV, and we haven't really spoken about that. And then there's private industries that are operating with the intention of making money. And we use that logic when we think about food consumption, right? We do say, not to say that the buck ends with personal choice, because a lot of how things are packaged in the supermarket, etc., also shape consumption. But we do at least acknowledge that the consumer has some power over saying what it is they want. And I think you're seeing the consumer shape some film and television now in terms of the number of female protagonists you're seeing, the increasing proportion of stories being told outside of the US and outside of, not always done well, but you have definitely seen an uptick in terms of representations of homosexual people or gay rights, but not even just like characters just happen to be gay on TV now. When I was growing up, if you were a gay character, it was like this big. It was part of the plot. Now, you're just a character who happens to be gay, and that's the way it should be. It's the power of the norm. This to me is, and if you think about the speed with which this has happened, right? Let's say 20, 30 years, there's been a really marked shift in terms of some of the representation of humans on film and TV. And this points to me to, one, a desire from consumers, and two, a responsiveness from industry to say, well, if we don't change, then our consumers are going to leave us. So obviously, there's something going on here with regards to animals. There's who decides, but also, has there been enough push, I guess, to ask for these things?
Yeah, I'm not sure if there's a push, but certainly this pluralism, this idea that it's there because we want it, and but we want it, so it's there. It is a bit like that, isn't it? What did come first? I think, though, for anything to be made, someone has to make a case for it, whether it's government TV. We've got the BBC here, which isn't run by the government. It's apparently, what's the word? Independent. But what the BBC would show would be very, very different, perhaps, from what you could be able to stream on Netflix, for example. But it still needs funding, right? It still needs funding to be made. The thing that Ed did with Surge, that was they got some support from a couple organisations for that. Yeah, there is a shift. There is certainly a shift in human representation for sure, but there's also a shift politically, and it's becoming more widespread. I'm speaking from Scotland, part of the UK. That's, again, whether that's okay or not is another thing for debate. But where some right of centre parties have just managed to, within only a few months of government, managed to overthrow a couple of seats here for this Reform Party, Nigel Farage and these people. So, and somebody was speaking on the radio earlier saying, why did you vote for them? Well, because, they're letting in too many black people, or there's too many people coming here. It's all about immigration. It's all about othering and animalising people, the same as is happening in other places in the world right now. So it's complicated. So while there's a shift, a kind of progressive, more liberal, more socialist shift, there's like that right-wing backlash that almost immediately follows.
All of this is such a fascinating conversation. I think 3 papers are coming out of this, thanks to you guys. But do you know, I was thinking about the credit that you talk about, Claudia. You'll see in the films that no animals were harmed. And it actually reminded me of a Hindi film which was released this year. It's called Azad, Free. And it's about this young stable boy who forms a deep relationship with a horse. And and he is of a lower caste, and how he tries to fight against the native oppression and the British colonial oppression, because the casteist Hindus very much colluded with the colonizers. But it was interesting what I found about that movie. They used CGI to create the horse. And I was like, this is interesting, because now they can claim that, no animals are harmed and we really care about the animals, but we are going to the CGI now. Okay, but then we are also talking about representing the animals as they are, like the reality. And I don't know what happens with that, but it just came to my mind. I was like, so I've got to dig deeper into that, like what happens. Like,
I did think about CGI earlier because I was thinking about Warhorse, the movie Warhorse.
Oh my God, yeah, exactly.
I mean, if what they can do now is unbelievable.
Right.
But yeah, then is it representation if it isn't real? But when it's real, then there's issues of labour.
True.
For me, I think it's pretty, I mean, at least for me, like I don't have perhaps the nuance here. I think that if it's not real animals on the screen, generally that's probably a good thing, because what do we mean when we say harm, right? Like no animals were harmed in this film, and these policies. So we've spoken about capitalism, we've spoken about representation, we've spoken about consumption, but you also have to speak about the policy, right? Like who's included in this, what is constituted as harm or not harm. And again, it's not to say animals don't necessarily enjoy these, Kendra Kultz has done a lot of great work on thinking about humane jobs. And there is maybe an argument to be made that, some animals enjoy training activities and doing these things. But there are also questions to be asked about the pet industry and the proclivity of, what does it take to get an elephant to do X in a film that you want? You can get CGI to do that. But then you have to ask, what are the ramifications of this technology and which environments does this technology impact? And I hear you. It's never easy, is it?
Totally makes sense, because I was actually happy when I saw that they use CGI. I was like, okay, good. Because my initial concern was just the horse. All the action I was watching, I was like, are they doing this with the real horse?
They used to actually trip horses. So, you know, when you see those old movies of horses like falling, they used to actually just have
tripwire.
Tripwires to it's okay, folks.
That was the same movies where they had white people blacked up in order to look like savages.
The minstrel shows and everything, exactly.
Gosh. I think we've kind of got away from that, but then we're in an interesting situation where there's even issues about disability, and if there's some kind of movie or show about a particular disability, it really should be an actor with that disability that has the part. There's been people getting upset about. People were upset that the Little Mermaid wasn't a white mermaid. I'm like, it's a mermaid, right? Like, I don't really. Anyway, people got upset about. I don't know what's happening. But yeah, I feel like there is a shift. You're absolutely right, Claudia, about shifts. Is whether the right shifts are happening in the right moments to the right animals.
It's probably not singular, right? Like you said, there is a bit of a pendulum, and there'll be pushbacks, and this idea that there's somehow an end, like a perfect end, is perhaps something we need to hold in suspension. But there can certainly be a better place for animals, and I think the fact that we're having this conversation points to the idea that scholars are starting to think about how animals are represented, one, but also how animals are treated in the making of. And I think that's important, and will probably be important in terms of achieving our longer term, let's say, political commitments of how we'd like animals to be taken seriously as subjects, right? So, okay, we're nearing the end now, otherwise I'm going to end up talking to you guys until tomorrow. Just to round up, so keeping in mind that this is a season focused on animals and media, and our goal today has been to talk about film and movies, I think and let me know if I've missed anything. One, we've spoken about, levels of representation and that they're often politicized, but they also have tensions between being both global and local. So when you think about representation, you have to hold those in tension. Two, questions of consumption, not only how the media is being consumed, but also how the animals tied to that media are being consumed. And also how consumption, I think, happens in the film itself, right? Like, how is meat happening? Who's eating what? How does this display representations of villainy or heroism? Important. Three, the different types of genres you get in film and TV. So whether it's children's films, whether it's documentaries, whether it's, regionally specific films, like Hindi films, but different Hindi films in different areas, these have different nuances and reach. Maybe that's connected to the first one as well. And I think the last one we spoke about was, I guess, tied to kind of capitalism and material versus effective realities. So, I mean, we were kind of all over the place there, I think, but we touched on some important dimensions of, I think, animals. And of course, the interconnected oppressions, right? Interconnected oppressions, both in representation and in material effects. Is there anything I've missed or something that you guys think has not yet come up in this conversation that would be important for listeners to know?
I think that perhaps we can't take away from the fact that actual experiences are the same as the ones, Ankita, you spoke about when you were little. Actual experiences with real life, not animated animals does seem to make a difference for a lot of people. I'm thinking of the Babe movie, Pigs Again, and how James Cromwell, the actor, by the time that first movie was finished and it was real pigs that were used there, he was vegan and he's been arrested. He's done this. I also include him in my paper on that basis. He's done some amazing work now to explain to people how pigs are smarter than dogs, goes the research. So how people can sit with a dog beside them and not see, but maybe they need to meet pigs. I had a great friend, Sheila, she's passed now since, and she did loads of work with chickens on in a sanctuary in the States. And she said they're all different, Lynda. They've all got their own little personalities. They're just amazing. And I'd never met chickens much to know that. I mean, I didn't not believe that. I just hadn't thought about it before. And she wrote poems about different chickens and 4 different chickens. And it didn't make her vegan. She was already vegan, but it certainly made other people more aware because she had those experiences to share.
I would just raise a flag there, though, that it also is important about where these interactions happen, because one of the things that prompts, again, a kind of material connection to films is the tendency of wanting to then have these animals in zoos or petting or buy them. And I think something is very different when you're interacting with an animal who you happen to interact with or who's in a sanctuary who can choose to interact with you versus one who you're seeing through a glass.
Yes, that's what
I know that's what you mean, but I just wanted
I should have probably
put a flag.
Yeah, that's what I meant, not to just let's go out and meet one. And actually, there's a great sanctuary here in Scotland called Tribe Animal Sanctuary, and they not only do they do amazing work for the non-humans they rescue, they also don't open to the public frequently. It's a now and again situation. You go for a few hours, they'll give you a tour to tell you the stories of these animals, where they came from, how they came to be in their care. They recommend what to bring, all that kind of stuff. I didn't know, for example, that hens like grapes. There you go. So, these kinds of things. But again, they're not doing it for the visitors, which a lot of these kinds of places have been known to do. But people can't help but be moved when they meet or see these animals. That said, because of the nature of the work that they do, they often only attract people who are already convinced by the argument. So, yeah, rather we don't want to just keep preaching to the converted. We want to try and move this. But then that's what my PhD work is about, is hoping that once people realise how unvegan the animals are represented in school, in the textbooks that they get, in the stories that they're told, and I mean, there's even the the meat and dairy industry have huge power and money to invest in educational resources for schools and whatnot. So, okay, you're doing farming as a theme. Well, can you just maybe look at how we make carrots, perhaps, and potatoes? This is Scotland. There's potatoes in Scotland. So this kind of thing, and trying to just by making things more vegan accessible, what you're doing is taking away those alternate, kind of maybe less beneficial representations of non-humans that maintain those kinds of views. And by being, unfortunately, sometimes you have to show, I would prefer it wasn't this way, but in order to get people to shift, you have to see there's a human benefit for people to really sign up to it. So, this plant-based foods kind of thing that's happened in the UK, where now you can buy basically a vegan dish in almost every restaurant, even in the chains, fast food restaurants. I can't really complain, because what it's doing is opening up these opportunities and making the case for ultra-processed food. It's very bad for you, but ultra-processed plant food is less bad for you because the processing doesn't alter the chemical. So these kinds of things, I feel like we're still at a stage where that the humans have to be seen to benefit before society will accept some shifts. It's unfortunate, but we need to make the most out of that while we can, I guess.
Ankita, any final thoughts with regards to film and TV?
I think one suggestion would be to just now watch films and TV with animals in your mind. I think it, these discussions are very helpful in those ways. Like, it completely shifts how you're going to engage with the film now. And definitely think about these various kind of ways in which power, especially power, permeates our conversation, whether it comes to animal, anthropic, or animality. So yeah, definitely. I mean, there are many movies to think about how animals have been represented. I think I am a Bollywood scholar, but I very strongly recommend exploring alternative Hindi films, which are not that mainstream Bollywood, and other regional Indian cinema for a much, just animal storytelling, if you are looking into. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's something to be said for also just choosing to not go mainstream. And I don't know if I'm always the best with this, because again, it's a question of that, like, streaming service, right? It's like the question of convenience. What is convenient to consume right now? And I think if we want, I think there was a film recently called The Last Pig, which I heard great things about in terms of, showing mindset shifts. I haven't watched it. Like, how have I not watched this film? So there's something to be said for making sure that you make the time to watch the films that might be doing it right. So that's my homework, to go and watch those. As we say goodbye now, perhaps you guys could tell us, you've given us some hints of what you're currently working on, but if you want to give us a closer breakdown of what you're currently working on, and if people want to get in touch with you to learn more, how do they do so? And Ankita, why don't we start with you?
Okay, so as I said before, I'll be working on my book proposal this summer, which is a very interesting book proposal. It's for a series which is called Food in India, but I'm doing a very different take on food. I'm actually talking about consumption in animals too, in that how we have completely changed the discourse around nourishment, and how it is very much interlinked with how we engage with not only animals, but the way we talk about other humans, minorities. And if you want to get in touch with me, I'm on LinkedIn, Ankita Rathour. I have a website which is on Georgia Tech. So if you type my name in Georgia Tech, it will take you there. But I also have a podcast. I'm going to shamelessly plug my podcast into it. The Desi Gaze, we are trying to do a different work, because we are trying to bring important Indian cinema which talks about topics like that. And I think in my summer, that's what I'll be doing. Claudia, I will be expanding, and I will be writing a chapter on the 1994 film Aranyak, which means Into the Jungle, and exploring the connections between class colonialism, animals, and cannibalism.
Wow, super interesting. And I'll make sure to put the links to everything, including your podcast, in the show notes. Lynda, how about you?
Yeah, I'm hoping to, by the summer, be interviewing the little people that are little vegans in Scotland. So everyone between the ages of 4 and 12 who are vegan, whose parents agree to let them talk to me anyway. So I'm hoping to get that done. I teach sociology at a local further ed college, so I have my summer off, which is nice. I spend a lot of time with my daughter. In terms of being in touch, I think I've got a couple of chapters and various bits and bobs of books, so I'll send you some links, Claudia, just because I forget what's happening. Sometimes it takes a couple of years between writing something and it actually coming out, so I forget where I'm at with things. But yeah, I'm also on LinkedIn, and I have a website, but it's not very good, so I need to do some work on that. So, but also I'm on most social media at LM Korimboccus, so people can find me that way as well. But
wonderful.
LinkedIn is as good as any, and I need to get better at using that because apparently it's a bit more professional than my usual.
Academics somehow have to be like, it's incredible how often at the end of this segment, like how like these are academics that are writing books and doing amazing things, and everyone's like, oh, I gotta get better at Twitter, and you're like, now Twitter's gone out the window. Everyone's like, oh, I gotta get better at LinkedIn. You know what, like it's okay if we don't quite have polished
There's
websites.
Too many things, and there's Blue Sky now as well, and they'd have to do it. I can't keep up.
It's okay is what I'm saying, because I can't keep up and no one can seem to keep up, and the people who can keep up are amazing. But I think it's totally fine. I'll make sure that your links to LinkedIn and whatever are available, and listeners, curb your enthusiasm, okay? Because none of us are web designers, okay? All right, thank you both of you for being on the show and for being so generous with your time and ideas today. And yeah, thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you to Lynda and Ankita for being so generous and being incredible guests. Thank you also to Animals in Philosophy, Politics, Law and Ethics, Apple, for sponsoring this podcast, and the Pollination Project, the School of Modern Language, the Ivan Allen College of Liberal Arts, as well as the School of Literature, Media and Communication at Georgia Tech University for co-sponsoring this season. The bed music was composed by Gordon Clark and the logo designed by Jeremy John. This episode was produced, hosted and edited by myself. This is The Animal Turn with me, Claudia Hurtenfelder.
For more great iRaw podcasts, visit irawpod.com. That's IROARPOD.com.